Okay, so welcome to the Master of the Skies weather briefing. So today is August 15th, 2023, and in this edition, I thought I'd show you some global composite satellite imagery for you to sort of better understand how the general circulation of the atmosphere works. So here we see the satellite imagery, which I can put into motion, and you could sort of see as I do so, the different cloud systems across the globe sort of moving depending on the different circulations in each of the hemisphere, the northern and southern hemisphere. And we can pick out some pretty interesting features. For those of you who purchased my ebook or training course, we discussed the general circulation of the atmosphere. And you can sort of see here the Intertropical Convergence Zone here along the tropics from west to east, and this is where the trade winds converge, if you remember. So the trade winds from the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere converge over this region, which leads to upward rising motion, clouds, and precipitation. And typically we have some thunderstorm clusters that ignite in this belt over the tropics. And during the warm season, it can be the origin for some tropical cyclone activity. And so we always sort of closely monitor this area for possible hurricane development during the hurricane season. Now, as we look closely, we can actually zoom in here a little bit and take a look at some of this cloud structure of the Intertropical Convergence Zone. You can even see actually a hurricane ongoing in the eastern Pacific here. I can even zoom in a little bit more closely. And you can actually see the structure quite nicely here on this windy.com site. And you can see that with this this satellite animation, you can see even the eye wall convection around the eye that's sort of visible here in the center. You can see also the spiraling band of clouds, the spiral bands of the hurricane. You could also see sort of this circular outflow at the top of the hurricane, which helps actually ventilate the storm and tends to make it stronger. And then at low levels, of course, you have the cyclonic rotation, and the closer you get to the center, the stronger the winds blow, and usually you get the strongest winds in the eye wall just around the eye. And this is usually the most intense part of the tropical cyclone. So this is Tropical Cyclone Fernanda, a strong Category 2 hurricane at the recording of this show here. And it's expected over the next 24 hours to sort of lose some intensity. It's actually suffering from some wind shear aloft that's starting to shear part of its circulation. So it'll be slowly weakening over the next few days as it drifts off to the northwest here. Now, if I zoom back out a little bit to get a better global picture again, you can see that as I go across the Pacific here, we're during nighttime, so we can just see some of the infrared imagery, or sometimes even depending on the moon phases, you can actually pick out some of the reflection off the clouds. You can see that the Intertropical Convergence Zone is also pretty active over Asia, and of course over India. This is monsoon season, so you tend to have the monsoon circulation that's active, bringing some pretty heavy rains over the Indian Peninsula and basically most of the sort of Thailand region and some of the Bangladesh, Vietnam, Cambodia, Bali, and so forth. You could see here again the Intertropical Convergence Zone over Central Africa, Equatorial Africa. And then if I zoom back out, you could also see some other features, both in the northern and southern hemisphere. You could see the spinning of the mid-latitude low-pressure systems, whether it be here over the eastern U.S., over southern Scandinavia and Europe, even over northern Canada, or even as I move further westward over the central North Pacific. And I can do that in the southern hemisphere, keeping in mind that it's actually winter there now. You can see, of course, the low pressure systems that spin in the opposite direction down there. And so you can also see those cloud systems ongoing. Now, what's interesting to do here also is you can actually plot the pressures, the surface pressures, just to get a better idea of what's going on in terms of the circulations. And if I do that, you can see that for this time on Tuesday, August 15th, 2023, you can pick out the subtropical Azores or Bermuda high here over the subtropical Atlantic, and the trade winds to the south of that. And then, of course, you have the trade winds from the subtropical high in the southern hemisphere, and you can see actually the converging of these winds here between the northern and southern hemisphere, and that's what's actually nurturing the Intertropical Convergence Zone and bringing those clouds and precipitation in this area that could potentially help nurture or develop a hurricane later in the season. Of course, we're in El Nino now, and that tends to sort of decrease the probability of an active hurricane season because it tends to introduce some upper level wind shear, which tends to be sort of not so favorable for tropical cyclone development. But at any given time, conditions can change quickly, and so this area always bears watching during a hurricane season. Now you could also see other features. You could also see here the Pacific high, which is pretty strong at this time of year. Now the Icelandic low during the summer tends to be weaker. You could see it's right now it's more under sort of a high pressure over Iceland, but the Icelandic low is sort of gets broken up. It can migrate a little bit further to the north, or it can get broken up and start to be active a little further south, but it tends to be much weaker. And then you have the subtropical high over the subtropical Atlantic that tends to dominate at this time of year. Same thing over the Pacific. The Aleutian low tends to be weaker and sometimes is sort of drifted further to the north over the sort of Arctic Ocean. And so you could really pick that out. You could also pick out the intense heat low over the Arabian Peninsula and Tibetan Plateau. And this is typically what helps feed the Indian monsoon during this time of year. So you could see sort of this onshore flow ongoing, and that tends to bring clouds and precipitation and thunderstorms to the area. You could also see the subtropical high pressure systems in the southern hemisphere, and also the active polar front further to the south, as we are really in the winter time in the southern hemisphere. And you could also see the intense cold and different pressure zones over the Antarctic. What we could also take a look at now is the sea surface temperatures. Now, if I click on that, there you go, and you could really see where the ocean temperatures are the greatest, and it's no surprise that it's typically right over the equatorial regions where they have an excess of solar radiation. And you can see that typically, for example, over the subtropical Atlantic with the trade winds and these warm sea surface temperatures, this is why we tend to have a hurricane season between June 1st and October 31st, is because this is the time of year where the sea surface temperatures are the warmest, and that could potentially help develop some tropical systems. So we'll keep an eye on the tropics over the next few months to see what actually develops. And the same thing over the Pacific warm pool. This is typically the most active region in terms of tropical cyclones during the hurricane seasons. So we've had a few systems already impact sort of southern Asia and the Japan region also. So we'll see how active this season is there. And we're also in, like I said before, in an El Nino year. We were in La Nina for a few years, and then we started to sort of enter the El Nino phase now, which means that we have abnormally high sea surface temperatures over the eastern Pacific, with sort of a westerly sea surface temperature advection of warm sea surface temperatures towards the western coast of South America and of Central America. And so this tends to shift the precipitation patterns from over the Australian region and Indonesia towards more the central Pacific, and sometimes, depending on the strength of El Nino, some pretty active precipitation patterns can set up even over the eastern Pacific. So we can actually take a look at that in more detail in terms of El Nino. So you have the Walker circulation, and basically you have more active precipitations over the central Pacific as the trade winds tends to weaken, and that lets these sea surface temperatures advect further to the east and sustain these precipitation patterns. So if we take a look at that, this is the anomaly actually for this beginning of August. And you can see that the anomalies are positive, meaning that the sea surface temperatures are higher than normal in the eastern Pacific and central Pacific, which points to this increasing El Nino pattern where you get these increased warm sea surface temperatures. And so when we take a look at the El Nino index, we're actually starting to be in the positive phase, in the El Nino phase, which is basically forecast to extend at least deep into this winter, with probably a peak sometime this coming winter, and it may sort of settle off afterwards. We'll have to wait and see. So there you go. And otherwise, yeah, so this is basically a nice representation, so you can sort of link up satellite imagery with what's going on in terms of the pressure systems at the surface, and also some of the sea surface temperatures, and also sea currents. You could see how the Bermuda or Azores High here in the subtropical Atlantic helps influence the not only the trade winds, but also the sea surface sort of flow direction. And so it basically helps feed the Gulf Stream that actually comes into the Gulf of Mexico and the eastern U.S. and then actually moves further north. And then this surface sea current basically advects further to the east and north towards Europe and the British Isles under an attenuated form. But basically these semi-permanent high-pressure systems, notably the one over the subtropical Atlantic, helps influence the sea surface currents. And so that's basically why we have this Gulf Stream that sets up here, is because on average we always have sort of a subtropical high in this location. So there you go. That's it for this edition of the weather briefing, Masters of the Skies weather briefing. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be seeing you next time. Thank you.